Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, welcome to an Ask Chuck Dixon Extra. I realized that yesterday's Ask Chuck Dixon was a little short. It was under 30 minutes. I usually talk a little bit longer than that. I don't know if I talked too fast or didn't go into enough depth. Maybe I'll just talk really, really slow from now on. No, I'm not going to do that. But anyway, I thought maybe some of you would feel cheated. So I'm going to answer a few more questions right here. Ian Potash. Hi, Chuck. What were some of the newcomers you knew in the comic book industry that you predicted their careers would take off? What were the telltale signs? Thanks. Well, guys like Jim Lee, I mean, everybody that saw Jim Lee's work knew he was going to take off. I remember Carl Potts showing off pages by Jim like a proud papa showing off his newborn baby. And Carl was justifiably proud that he had basically discovered this guy and was showing off to everybody. And Jim and Carl worked together for quite a bit on Punisher War Journal. And but Jim, you could see it. I mean, he didn't need a whole lot more development, a whole lot more guidance. I think Carl gave him some guidance on storytelling because storytelling is a big issue with Carl, as it should be for anybody wanting to create comics. And I think he guided Jim along a little bit, but Jim didn't. Jim's a smart guy, picked it up quick, didn't need a lot of guidance. And everybody that saw it was like, whoa, this guy leapt fully formed from the forehead of Zeus. So yeah, that wasn't hard to guess. I remember when I first started working with Graham, he was just a young kid with a dream. And you could see it in the work. You could see, first of all, you could see it in the passion. This guy loved comics. You could tell Graham was a lifer. I knew it the minute I met him. This guy is a comic book guy, and he's going to stay a comic book guy the rest of his life because he just loved it. The way he talked about it and everything else. And you could see in his early work, his early work was a little rough in spots, but you could see all the potential. He knew how to tell a story. He knew how to compose a panel. Largely his deficits were the same deficits every artist has when they're first starting getting into comics. They've still got a bit to learn about anatomy and things like that. But he had gone to the Kubert School. He had gotten the basics, and it was just a matter of time. It was just a matter of putting in the reps, putting in the work. I reached a point early on in this business where I could look at a wannabe artist's work and say, another 20 pages and this guy is ready for prime time. Sometimes these guys just need the work and the pressure of a deadline and the faith of an editor and the feel that, hey, I'm in the business. I got to up my game. I got to prove myself. I got to make this happen. And Graham did that, obviously, in spades. He dug in and just got better and better and better. And I think to this day, Graham is still getting better. Graham didn't accept the fact that he was never going to continue to develop his talents. And any, comic book artist worth their salt, I think any artist worth their salt is going to tell you that you're always learning. You're learning new things all the time. And, in addition to being a good friend, Graham is an amazing comic talent, in my opinion. But, I could see it. I could see this guy was going to be around for a while. I didn't realize that all these years later, we'd still be working together. But I'm glad we did. Flint Henry's another one. I saw Flint's work and I thought, man, all this guy needs is the reps. And Flint is kind of like the polar opposite of Graham. Larry Hama described Flint's work this way. He said that some artists have hand, John Buscema, and some artists have mojo, guys like, Spain Rodriguez. And Flint, he told Flint, you've got more mojo than hand, but I love it. I love the energy and everything else. that you bring to the work. And when I first saw Flint's work, I was like, wow, this guy, just like Graham, he loves this stuff. He loves this stuff. He loves drawing, and he's into it. And he just needs some guidance with storytelling and stuff like that. And he just needs to do the pages. And I thought, after 20 or 30 pages, this guy would be awesome. And I knew, just like when I first met Graham, I want to work with this guy. I want to keep working with this guy. I certainly had that feeling with Flint. I wanted to keep working with him. And he defied my expectations. He got really good on his first paid assignment. I want to say the first thing he did paid was a backup story for Tim Truman and Scout. And he just brought it. Just amazing stuff. And like I said with Graham, it's like you can noodle around and do spec pieces and pitch pieces and stuff like that. But when you get the job and you know there's going to be a paycheck and you know your career's on the line, that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when you really get serious about it. And Flint did, as Graham did. Now, there's other artists that it was harder to see. It was harder to see. Johnny Romita Jr., when Johnny Romita Jr. first came on the scene, Johnny Romita Jr. is he's a comic book icon. He's a legend. But when he first came on the scene, the stuff was kind of underwhelming. It was kind of like, a pale imitation of his dad. It was competent, but not that interesting. It wasn't very vibrant or appealing. And, Johnny went away for a little while and came back, and whatever happened in that interim, he got so much better. The work was so much more dynamic. He had taken the basics that he knew, and now he knew how to, warp them and make his pencil do what he wanted it to do. And I got a lot of theories about this. I've never spoken to him about this, but his dad was a fantastic comic artist. His dad was a legend as well. And Johnny Romita Sr., Johnny's dad, the one problem he always had was meeting deadlines. He was very slow. He would second guess himself. He basically worked too hard at this stuff. And I remember finding this series he did in the late 50s called The Western Kid. Now, stick with me here. He did this series called The Western Kid, and it was a monthly, and he managed to turn it out monthly. Johnny always had problems, or Mr. Romita always had problems meeting a deadline, even when he was on Spider-Man. You'll note that there's a lot of fill-ins. He had to have help with backgrounds. Sometimes he would do layouts and someone else would finish them, things like that. And not because the guy was lazy, just because he had a hesitancy. I don't know what it was. Maybe the artist version of writer's block, but The Western Kid, he managed to turn out monthly. And I think the reason why is because he adopted a far more simplistic, more cartoony style than he had used previously. Previous to this, Johnny Romita Sr.'s work was very illustrative, lots of heavy ink work and cross-hatching and stuff like that. He's doing The Western Kid, he kind of simplified his style, I think, to meet the deadline. And I got to think that he gave his son the same advice. If you want to stay in this business, you want to meet deadlines and everything else, maybe simplify your style, lean more toward the cartooning, lean away from, the kind of classic Marvel look, and find your own path. And I think that's what happened. And of course, Johnny's never had a problem with deadlines. He cranks them pages out like magic. But it's that's my theory, my very own. So another excellent example of this is Paul Pelletier. Now, Paul Pelletier, I was working at DC when Paul was working on Green Lantern, and his work was good. It was competent. He had the basics, but it wasn't thrilling. Didn't knock your socks off. It, was kind of bland, kind of pedestrian. And I thought, well, that's just the limitation of the guy's talents. What I didn't take into account was that he was working on Green Lantern under an editor who kept either pulling issues away from him or having him do the issues in a rush. The scripts would come in late, and Paul basically had to crank these pages out. And if you look over Paul's run on Green Lantern, you'll see often he either did the end of the story or the beginning of the story, and there would be a fill-in artist doing the rest. And that's because the editor would panic and get another artist to do the pages to complete the issue. It's hard to work under those conditions. First, you're being asked to work in a hurry, so you can't do your best work. And you're always thinking, hey, I might have pages taken away from me. In other words, I may have my income reduced this month because my editor freaked out because he doesn't have faith in me that I'll get this done. And then having the scripts arrive late, which cuts cuts your work time off right at the beginning. You start out behind the eight ball, and a lot of that was the reason why Paul's work looked the way it did. And knowing this, it's miraculous it looked as good as it did. But Paul's a consummate pro. Now, Paul shows up at CrossGen. He gets hired at CrossGen, and I'm like, okay, I guess he's an okay artist. And he gets to working with Tony Bedard. And it's like, wow, this is what he's capable of. Because at CrossGen, the artists weren't allowed to draw more than a page a day. And so Paul now has an assignment. He has a page to draw. He's given all the time to draw it. No one's going to take the book away from him. It's his book. He owns it. He has a team. He has an inker. He has a colorist. And they're going to do the best they can. And it's like the guy was just born again hard. It's like all of a sudden we got to see what this guy was really capable of under the right circumstances. I think that's true for an awful lot of comic artists. And of course, Paul goes on to a legendary run on Guardians of the Galaxy. He goes from strength to strength, developing his talent, and does just tremendous work for both DC and Marvel. So it's just an example of, you've got to have faith in a guy. You've got to be able to see what this guy can do and know to tailor the work for him, and then give him the time to do it. And that's all that Paul needed, was the time to do it and the knowledge that his publisher had faith in him, that he was going to hand in great work, and he did, and he does to this day. Rex Moss. I had not realized that Ingrid said a bad word in Alpha Core #1. Superhero. Shocking. I did not realize that Marvel and DC had copyrighted the word. Yor and the Rippaverse were so infringing on that copyright till the recent Super Babies defeat of Marvel and DC. Do you think the copyright laws of superhero will make any difference to independent creators or Marvel and DC? Well, I had Ingrid refer to superhero. I mean, superhero, despite the trademarks and the copyright and everything else, is understood to be a generic word. She's using it in conversation. In fact, she's in the conversation saying that she's not a superhero. And we don't refer to the characters as superheroes in the story because, we've all been told, DC and Marvel have lawyers on hooks ready to go after you if you use the term, if you refer to your characters as superheroes, particularly on a cover. And you got to stay away from that. And now we don't, because apparently DC and Marvel's lawyers screwed up and they didn't respond to this guy's complaints, this Super Babies guy who I know nothing about. He lodged a complaint with the copyright people, and DC and Marvel didn't challenge it, and so they ended up, losing the word superhero. Do I think it's going to affect them in any way? No, they don't trade that hard on the word superhero, and everybody understands what a superhero is. You see generic superheroes used in advertising for, plumbing companies and insurance companies and everything else. And everybody understands, when you see a commercial with a bunch of kids running around with bath towels tied around their necks, they're supposed to be superheroes. It would be like Kleenex trying to trademark the word tissue. It doesn't make any sense at all. It never did make any sense. And I'm actually glad somebody challenged it, because I like to see the big guys tumble every once in a while. Okay, Thomas Pellegrino. Your Airboy series is my favorite comic book of all time. Well, thank you. And I'm just rereading it once again. It started off as a bi-weekly and with 12 pages of story in each issue. Was that because it was a bi-weekly and editorial to split your scripts in half? Or did you only write in shorter chapters to have a story feel like a Golden Age comic, which were shorter in page length? Also, is it easier to write in small chapters of 8, 12 pages for an ongoing series, or do you normally write in 20, 22 page regular issue lengths? Well, these days I mostly write graphic novels, but I think the stories were 14 pages. I seem to remember they were 14 pages. And um, Airboy was, Dean Mullaney had discovered that Airboy was in public domain and wanted to do a comic, but he wanted to get it out there. He wanted to reintroduce the public to Airboy, a character in his heyday, sold as well as Superman and Batman, but was completely forgotten by comic readers by the 1980s. It was just this forgotten character left on a shelf when his publisher decided to simply stop publishing comics rather than bow to the comics code. And and so for that reason, to get it out in front of as many people as possible, to reintroduce Airboy to the larger comic book reading public, Dean Mullaney thought it'd be a good idea to price it as low as possible to make it basically irresistible. And I think comics were $1.25, $1.75 at this point, and we were selling Airboy bi-weekly for 50 cents. So for $1, by the end of the month, you had a complete comic book story. And they were written that way. This was always supposed to be formatted as a weekly installment, like the old movie serials. And I think we eventually expanded it so that it had a backup story and all the rest, or with Skywolf. But that was the marketing plan, and it worked. Readers who had never heard of Airboy were picking up Airboy because, what the heck, another 50 cents? And also, Dean Mullaney was a brilliant guerrilla marketer. He would overship the comics, and he would basically say, look, I know you ordered 20 of these, but I'm sending you 50. And the extra 30 are returnable if you don't sell them. And but they sold through. Dean had enough faith in this book that it would sell through, and it did. And Dean's reasoning was, comics come in on Wednesday. If the retailer orders like 10 copies of a new comic, it's gone by Saturday when a whole bunch of other fans show up, the weekend comic book fans show up. And his idea was, if I overship, that means there will still be copies on the stand over the weekend. And it worked, and they sold through. And Dean did a lot of stuff like that, guerrilla marketing. Dean Mullaney remains, of course, a genius at guerrilla marketing. He is comic books' greatest marketer, in my opinion. He loved the medium. He loved promoting it. He's always come up with inventive ways of doing it. But long story short, yes, it was formatted to be a bi-weekly. You can kind of tell by, the splash pages each issue and the cliffhangers each issue. And boy, it was fun to write. It was really a lot of fun to write because the bi-weekly thing sort of gave an energy to it, a kinetic energy. The story had to move swiftly in order to create enough of an engaging storyline in each chapter for it to move along. So the story had to be paced more briskly than a normal monthly comic would be. And I think that also helped with sales and garnering interest for the title. So there you go. So that's it. That's your little extra scoop, extra ladle full of Ask Chuck Dixon dropped in your bowl for absolutely free. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I will see all of you down the road and possibly talk